Hello, and welcome to this week's Business Transformation 101 podcast. I am your host, Bill Feges. In our podcast 2 weeks ago, we provided an overview of long-term or strategic planning and noted it was composed of three components: strategic creation, strategic planning, and strategy execution. Last week, we did a deep dive on the strategy creation process with Dr. Phil Samuel of the Lean Methods Group. This week, we're going to do a deep dive on the strategy execution component, which is implemented using the strategy deployment process, or SD process. I've successfully utilized this process over the past 20 plus years in more than 15 businesses, ranging in size from 20 million in revenue to 450 million in revenue. In today's podcast, we will provide a more detailed view of the key aspects of the strategy deployment process. SD is a robust, structured process that is utilized to drive breakthrough performance in critical business processes. It also aligns and focuses the organization on the strategic plan objectives and improvement priorities while ensuring there is an appropriate deployment of people, investments, and resources. Strategy planning is made up of three processes as shown. Strategy creation, as described in last week's podcast, encompasses strategic thinking and building a portfolio of potential strategies. Strategic planning is the process of narrowing down the portfolio of potential strategies to specific ones to be executed by the team. Strategy execution, or strategy deployment, is the third process and implements the selected strategy. Per the flowchart shown, the selected 3-year objectives, annual objectives, and improvement priorities are the inputs from the strategy creation strategic planning process into the SD process. In the SD process, the team develops detailed action plans to execute the year 1 improvement priorities and measures the progress utilizing targets to improve, or TTI metrics. Progress on the action plans and achieving the TTIs is monitored through a monthly SD review process. In these reviews, the team follows a define, measure, analyze, improve, control, DMAIC process, or a PDCA, plan, do, check, act approach to improve the TTIs. Also at year end, the team holds a review of the progress on achieving the TTIs, annual objectives, and 3-year breakthrough objectives, and feeds the results back into the next strategy creation update. The goal of utilizing the SD process is to build a sustainable competitive advantage that drives profitable growth. As this chart shows, every year the team, through daily management, utilizes Kaizens to make incremental improvements as measured through KPIs. These incremental improvements become standard work and part of the base performance in subsequent years. In addition to these incremental improvements, each year the team makes breakthrough improvements as measured by TTIs tied to implementing the strategic improvement priorities. These breakthrough improvements also become standard work and part of the base performance in subsequent years. The SD process is made up of 5 steps that are documented on an SDX matrix as shown. The first step is what and describes the 3-year breakthrough objectives. These are listed in the 6 o'clock position of the X matrix. Note that the highest priority items are listed closest to the X. The second step is how far and describes the annual objectives, or what portion of 3-year objectives are being targeted for year 1. The annual objectives are listed in the 9 o'clock position of the X matrix. Step 3 is how and describes the improvement priorities that will be implemented in year 1 to achieve the annual objectives. The improvement priorities are listed in the 12 o'clock position of the X matrix. Step 4 is who and details the resources that will be assigned to implement the action plans associated with the improvement priorities. The resources are listed in the far right 3 o'clock position of the X matrix. And finally, step 5 is how much and when, which defines the targets to improve, or TTIs, that will measure the progress made in achieving the improvement priorities. The TTIs are listed in the 3 o'clock position of the X matrix. Let's discuss each of the 5 SD steps in a little more detail, starting with step 1, which details the 3-year breakthrough objectives. A breakthrough is the act of moving beyond a major barrier or a significant advance in knowledge. It could also be described as a quantum leap. Typically, it involves something the organization does not currently know how to do and would require a cross-functional team to achieve. Here is the ultimate example of a breakthrough objective. When President Kennedy in 1961 set out the objective to, by the end of the decade, land a man on the moon and return him safely, much of the knowledge and technologies required to achieve this objective did not exist. In many cases, the scientific and engineering communities had no idea how to do this. There are several reasons the team should be utilizing breakthrough thinking. It is safe to assume that your customers will continue to raise the bar on their expectations. It is also safe to assume most, if not all, your competitors are not going to be standing still and resting on their laurels. Finally, does your company want to be a leader or a follower? These are all key reasons to embrace breakthrough thinking. As the team develops the 3-year breakthrough objectives, they should test them against this checklist to determine if they are really breakthrough. Also, the objectives should be written starting with an action verb such as improve, create, reduce, increase, followed by the metric, and then from, which is the current state for the metric, and to, which is the future state, and then by, which provides a date for achieving the future state. This date would typically be the last year of the strategic plan period, although it could be sooner. Here are some example 3-year breakthrough objectives for operational metrics, SQDCG. Note that all these examples have significant improvements in their respective metrics over the plan period. Remember, these are breakthrough improvements, not incremental improvements. Also note that on this summary, the cost or C metric is broken down into inventory or I and productivity or P for this specific example. Here are 3-year breakthrough examples for financial metrics. Once again, notice the breakthrough nature of these improvements. One of the key questions that always arises on breakthrough objective is how many is the right number? There is no right number, but I would strongly recommend keeping it to 3 or fewer, since every objective will cascade to many improvement priorities, which then requires many resources. Focus is important, and hitting one objective out of the park is better than mediocre results on 3 objectives. Moving to step 2 of the SD process, we have setting the annual breakthrough objective, which defines the progress that will be made in year 1 of the 3-year trajectory for each 3-year breakthrough objective. In setting the annual breakthrough objective, the team should consider numerous aspects of the objective. The trajectory of moving from the current state to the future state in year 3 of the strategy can take many forms. If, for example, the objective is revenue growth, and that growth is tied to introducing new products and/or developing new customers, the trajectory shown in scenario 4 is probably much more likely than the scenario 1 trajectory. Introducing new products and/or developing new customers can often have a 12 to 24-month gestation period, so expecting big growth in revenue in year 1 of this situation is probably not realistic. On the other hand, if the 3-year objective is to significantly reduce safety incidents, there are probably numerous opportunities to implement improvements quickly and see a significant improvement in year 1, as shown in the scenario 1 trajectory. The team needs to consider these factors in setting the annual objectives, but they should be aggressively realistic percentage of the 3-year breakthrough objective and not an incremental improvement. Remember that incremental improvements measured by KPIs should fall under daily management, while breakthrough improvements require reinventing existing processes or inventing new processes to get quantum leap improvement as measured by TTIs. Here are some example annual breakthroughs and how they compare to their respective 3-year breakthroughs. Step 3 of the SD process is determining the improvement priorities implemented in year 1 that will support achievement of the annual breakthrough objectives. The team must identify the critical processes that will drive the business from the current state to the annual breakthrough objectives. As noted previously, focusing on the critical few priorities for each objective will maximize the opportunity for success by not overloading the available resources. The team should use this checklist to confirm that it has the right priorities identified. A key here is to make sure these priorities are targeting the improvement or creation of sustainable processes. Here are example SQDC-G improvement priorities and how they relate to supporting their respective 1-year breakthrough objectives. The improvement priorities were identified in the strategy creation TOES matrix and flowed down, as noted earlier in the podcast and discussed in the prior podcast on strategy creation. This year's process improvements will become daily management next year. In step 4 of the SD process, the team assigns resources to the improvement priorities. The allocation of resources is critical to the success of the strategy deployment processes. Having the right resources and the right amount of resources will maximize the probability of success. To create accountability, each improvement priority has one clear leader. In addition to identifying the leader, the matrix identifies key secondary resources as appropriate for each improvement priority. The leadership team needs to balance resource allocation to ensure daily management maintains and incrementally improves the foundation of the business, while simultaneously achieving the annual breakthrough objectives through the improvement priorities. The 5th and final step of the SD process is creation of the targets to improve, or TTIs. The TTIs measure progress on the improvement priorities. Each improvement priority has an action plan, and the TTIs should measure the status of the action plans. The SD matrix will be reviewed by leadership monthly, so the TTIs should provide insight on progress on at least a monthly level of granularity. The team could elect to also have weekly or daily metrics to track progress if appropriate. Note that the improvement priorities could have multiple TTIs if that is necessary to properly execute and monitor the action plans. However, at a minimum, each improvement priority will have at least one TTI. Here is a TTI checklist that the team can use to ensure that each TTI is appropriate, measurable, understandable, and well-defined. Here are some TTIs for SQDC metrics. This is a complete top-down, top-level SD matrix. The solid and open dots, highlighted by the green arrows, reflect the connections and flow of logic between the 3-year breakthrough objectives, the annual breakthrough objectives, the improvement priorities tied to those objectives, and the TTIs tied to the improvement priorities, and finally, the resource assignments to execute the improvement priorities and their associated action plans. Typically, the draft SD matrix will be developed in a 2-day session with the senior leadership team based upon the inputs from the strategy creation and strategy planning processes. I recommend having a facilitator for the 2-day session until the team has been through 2 or 3 cycles of creating an SD matrix. The resultant draft SD matrix should then be shared with the other teams that were involved in the strategy creation process to get their inputs and thoughts. The inputs are then incorporated in the draft as appropriate, and the process is iterated to achieve a final SD matrix. This iteration process in some companies is called a catchball process, where the teams are throwing the ball back and forth to iterate the final SD matrix. The final SD matrix should be shared with the entire organization to obtain alignment and clarify expectations. The X matrix is an excellent tool to use for communicating the business strategy and how that strategy will be executed to the entire organization. Note that top level indicates that this is the SD matrix for the entire business. Depending upon the size, structure, and complexity of the business, the SD process allows for cascading to segments of the business. Creating an SD matrix for specific segments of the business, for example, product lines or geographic regions, may be appropriate for your business. Cascading is beyond the scope of this podcast, but I would recommend that any company embarking on the use of the SD process implement a single top-level matrix for the first year and then consider cascading in future years if appropriate. One of leadership's biggest challenges is balancing the resources and attention of the organization to achieve the annual operating plan objectives through daily management, while simultaneously achieving the year one breakthrough objectives through strategy deployment. As noted previously, daily management is critical to maintaining and incrementally improving the foundation or base of the business. Daily management is about the basic blocking and tackling that needs to be done daily and even hourly to keep the business operating effectively. It is also about setting a continuous improvement cadence that utilizes Kaizen events by all employees to endlessly drive incremental improvements, singles, not home runs, to the key processes of the business as measured by KPIs. Its success is predicated on having standard work in place and ensuring the organization executes the standard work. Typically, the daily management has limited cross-functional interaction. In addition to keeping the foundation strong through daily management, leadership needs to build on the foundation to drive growth utilizing the improvement priorities and TTIs defined in the SD matrix. The improvements are breakthrough or transformational and require heavy cross-functional teamwork. These teams are creating new standard work on processes that will result in long-term quantum leaps to the business performance. This graph illustrates how leadership needs to deploy resources. Daily management using standard work and KPI needs to be pushed down into the organization, with top leadership spending limited time monitoring this. Top leadership needs to be spending the bulk of its time on long-term strategic direction of the business. This includes taking time daily or weekly to be continually reviewing the current state of the business and environmental trends, that is, market trends, technology trends, customer insights, and business model trends. It also includes doggedly leading the team's execution of the improvement priority action plans. To move the business from good to great, the leadership teams need to embrace the power of the and versus the tyranny of the or. Organizations that rise above the rest operate in and mode. The team needs to execute effective daily management and execute on strategy deployment. Another example is they need to deliver new products on time and on budget, and that meet or exceed customer expectations, and equals a high performance culture. To wrap up, the strategy deployment process provides a structured, disciplined framework that allows the team to answer the question, how will we win? Utilize the strategy deployment process to implement the company's strategic plan, which will drive the long-term success of the business. This process will ensure engagement and alignment of the organization, while providing a focus on executing the right improvement priorities to profitably grow the business. Here are some references to learn more about strategy deployment. In the interest of continuous improvement, I invite feedback from our listeners. Please share your thoughts and ideas on these weekly podcasts, and feel free to suggest topics which you believe may provide useful information for you and our listeners. Thank you for joining us on today's podcast, and please join us next week for the podcast where we will discuss the new product development process.